Good evening, everybody. This is Cross Border Talks, perhaps your favorite show on international relations show from social perspective. And today I, Małgorzata Kulbaczewska-Figat, will be the sole host of the meeting because my colleague Veronika Susova-Salminen comes to you as the guest this time. This episode will be dedicated to Veronica's excellent study, 100 Shades of the EU, which was co-authored by her, Giuseppe Celi, our second guest, and Valentina Petrovic. Before I pass on to my first question, I invite you to subscribe Cross Border Talks. We are on YouTube, SoundCloud, Spotify, wherever you want. If you want to watch, if you want to listen, all options are on the table. And our today's guests are Giuseppe Celi, the senior researcher responsible for the Southern Europe countries group, economist from Italy, associated professor of economics in the University of Foggia, co-author of the book Crises in the European Monetary Union, and Veronika Susova-Salminen, an expert on Central and Eastern Europe countries, specializing in history and politics of this region, author of books on Russia, and holding a degree in anthropology from Charles University in Prague. And I think that it will be you, Veronika, who can say more precisely what is the whole study about, what are the 100 Shades of the EU, and why your work is so exceptional.
Hello, everybody. Thank you, Małgorzata, for the possibility this time to speak about something else and not as the interviewer, but as a guest. I am very glad that I can introduce very shortly only our new study, which was launched in the middle of this year. It is the study called 100 Shades of the European Union, and it is the study which is studying the relation between peripheries of today's European Union, within them, and also to the core, of course. I am very glad that Giuseppe Celi is with us because he is one of our co-authors. Valentina Petrovic is today not joining us, but I hope she will join us under the other occasion. And she will be able to talk also about her topics, her research topics within study and her own research topics. So I will just show the book. We have a book which you can see it. It is the book which is which exists in the form of physical, and also you can find the book on the pages of Transform Europe for free. You can download it there. And the whole study was supported by Transform Europe and Rosa Luxemburg Stiftung, which I should say in the beginning. So what was the idea behind? I designed originally the research project for Transform, which was based on the idea that we will compare two recent peripheries of the European Union, meaning Southern Europe, Southern European member states, and the member states on the Eastern Wing. It means East European states and the Balkan member states. And the idea was original to have a look on the European Union through the prism of peripherality and through the prism of concept relations between periphery and the core. So basically to see the political economy of the European Union with special focus on these countries. Then Giuseppe and Valentina joined us and we started to work on it together. We agreed basically that we will do the comparison. We will have a look on the peripherality as a main focus, but of course you never can do it without having a look at the core. Because the core and periphery are related and they cannot exist without each other. That we will have a scope of last 30 years in order to have that longer historical dynamics, and also to have the possibility that both regions, both these two peripheries are already within the European Union. So we can see the interaction between them within the European Union, and of course the way how the European Union is working for them, how they are in the European Union, let's say, embedded, and how the European Union integration process work for these two regions or peripheries. So this was the main idea. The next our argument is that peripherality is not a one-dimensional thing. We try to grasp it from three different dimensions. We look on the economic one, which is very important. Indeed, we study political economics, so that's the first dimension. Here today, Giuseppe will tell us our findings about the economic models which are functioning on these peripheries and how they were created by the integration process, how is the emergence and the genealogy. And then we looked on the political dimension, which is the second most important, of course. And finally, on the ideological and cultural dimensions of peripherality. So we were trying to have like 3D picture of the peripherality within the European Union. And we were trying, based on the different type of approaches and studies and interdisciplinary, because it's needed to say that Giuseppe is economist, I am the comparative historian, anthropologist, and Valentina is political scientist. So we had these three options, which was nicely coming together. It was since the beginning, this was the idea. And the final idea behind the study was that it is done by people from these regions. They are from the Southern Europe and they are from Central East and Balkan countries, because we wanted that it's also about the self-representation, that not that somebody somebody outside from other parts of the Europe, especially from the core, by the way, is talking about our problems. And it is rather based on this kind of interaction. And finally, the idea was to grasp or to grasp the peripherality, show that European Union is still about the power. It didn't disappear anywhere, despite the many ideological narratives around it. It's still there. It has different shapes. It is not just economical power. It is also ideological power and political power. It has different actors, because there are European institutions working with transnational corporations, super important for our region, Central and East Europe, and many others. So this was the final idea behind, and totally on the top of it was, of course, to try to grasp or to enlarge or to even enable some kind of dialogue between these two peripheries, because whatever you know about the periphery, about core and periphery relations, you know that the core is usually the filter between different cores, between different peripheries, and it is not allowing this kind of division of labor, division of relations, to have direct relations, which is, in my opinion, politically and strategically very bad for both European peripheries today. So this is, in a nutshell, very shortly, about what is the study about.
Okay, Giuseppe, so you studied the economical dimension of the peripheries. What key characteristics of the economic models of the southern periphery and the eastern periphery have you found? Can we really speak of a particular model that was developed over history in these two groups of countries, and what is particular for it?
Yes, thanks for the question. Yes, the answer to this question requires a necessary premise, because after the birth of the EU, after the Euro section and the eastward enlargement of the EU, important change occurred in production and trade relations among European countries. If you want a profound, hierarchical reorganization of European industrial structure, leading to the consolidation of Germany as hegemonic economic power in Europe, and to a reshuffling, if you want, of hierarchical relation between core and peripheral countries. So, on the one hand, the eastern expansion of the powerful German manufacturing platform strengthened the industrial base of some peripheral countries, especially Visegrad Group countries. And on the other hand, other peripheral countries followed a different destiny, a different evolution, marked by the industrialization, loss of human capital through huge emigration flows, and external dependence on financial flows in the case of Southern Europe. However, when we compare the EU periphery, we can say that both periphery, the south and the east, have in common an element, an external externally dependent position in terms of capital, investment, and technologies, which determines a very important constraint on their economic development. But of course, these dependencies are structured according to different economic models and different historical contexts. For example, when we look at southern EU peripheral countries, these countries during the crisis of the 1970s stopped or slowed down their process of industrialization, and in the following years, in the 80s and the 90s, marked by deregulation and liberalization of market on a global level, this country embarked on the road toward financialization, with hypertrophy of service, and in some cases also of public sector. And financialization for these countries was a particularly distorting factor for their development, because this factor contributed to divert resources from long-term industrial investment to activity which were much more volatile, with shorter-term returns. So the result was the persistence of the incompleteness of the production matrix of these countries. So we can define the development model of southern peripheral countries as a, if you want, as a debt finance consumption-led growth without a complete productive base. So in some way, the present economic model of Southern Europe is not supporting convergence in the EU context, because there are countries like Italy or Greece that have experienced a continuous economic and social decline, and even the competition from Eastern peripheral countries, especially from Visegrad country, in their role of providers of intermediate goods for the German manufacturing industry, contributed to a further weakening of production base in Southern Europe. If you look, for example, a very simple indicator, the evolution of GDP per capita in Southern and Eastern European countries over the last 2 decades, the trend that emerged is quite unequivocal, because the countries of Southern periphery go down, especially after the 2008 crisis, while the countries of Eastern periphery go up. And while at the beginning of the period in the late 1990s, there is a clear division between the group of Southern peripheral countries showing a very higher GDP per capita index, and the band of Eastern periphery countries displaying a much lower index. So there is a clear distinction between the 2 groups of countries. And at the end of the period, the 2 bands, the 2 groups became blurred. So there is a convergence, a downward convergence for Southern Europe, an upward convergence for Eastern peripheral countries. And that it's very impressive to observe, for example, the peripheralization of a country like Italy, that at the beginning of period, this country started with a very high index of GDP per capita, compared to the EU average. But at the end of the period, the index of Italy is very close to that of Czech Republic, So when we pass to consider the Eastern EU periphery, we know that FDI, foreign direct investment, are the key drivers of economic development of these countries. But however, even the robust development of the most dynamic Central Eastern European countries, the Visegrad group countries, present element of fragility, dependence on foreign capital, and technology, limited, asphyctic, domestic market, hypertrophy of export with respect to GDP, low wage, and in some way mono-specialization in some sector, like car industry. Regarding the less dynamic Eastern European economies, the Baltics country and the Southeastern European countries, so Western Balkans or other countries like Slovenia or Croatia, this economy in some way present fragilities that are very similar to those associated with Southern European countries, because in this case, in the case of these countries, FDI are concentrated in the service sector, the so-called FIRE sector is the acronym for finance, insurance, and real estate sector. So this economy are financialized economies, in the case of Baltic states, or are countries disproportionately oriented toward tourism activity, like Bulgaria and Croatia. However, Eastern European countries, contrary to Southern European countries, are upward converging, are converging in the EU context, even if the macroeconomic convergence hides important regional divides within countries. And we show this in our study. So big regional divides, even if there is a strong upward convergence at macroeconomic level in these peripheral countries. So I stop here. Okay.
You talked a lot about fragility, which is behind even what seems to be a success of Eastern economics. So I must ask this question, if this fragility will be even bigger in the difficult time that we live now, with energy crisis looming, with the general prices rising looming. How about these economies in these difficult times? Will they be able to cope with the new challenges?
Yeah. The war in Ukraine, this is not the most challenge, actually. The war in Ukraine, but also the other dramatic shock represented by pandemic, has revealed how fragile global value chains are, because many studies that have analyzed the propagation effects of shock like coronavirus, the war, but even earthquakes alongside the global value chains have revealed how destructive are these effects in terms of output, employment, productive capacity. Look, for instance, at the production bottlenecks related to the war in Ukraine. The shortage of a simple raw material like nickel could paralyze electric car production, for instance, because nickel is an important material for the production of electric vehicles, especially for batteries. And Russia is one of the main world exporters of nickel. And in the EU, the most dependent countries on nickel imported from Russia are Germany, Visegrad countries, and also Baltic states and Finland. Therefore, countries belonging to the CMC, CMC is the acronym for Central European Manufacturing Core, are particularly vulnerable to the impact of war, for this reason. But these countries are also particularly sensitive to the war in Ukraine from another point of view. Because if you look at another indicator, for example, the share of total employment in energy-intensive sector, we can observe that this country, but in this case also Italy, this country have a share particularly high. So employment in these countries is concentrated in energy-intensive sector. So this evidence, together with the relatively higher dependence on fossil energy imported from Russia make this country, Germany, this country, but also Italy, particularly vulnerable to the impact of war. And in general, the war, like the previous shock, 2008 crisis and the pandemic, is producing asymmetric effect on European countries. But this time, with a reshuffling of the traditional core periphery division, because now Germany, this country, but also Italy, have in common a greater concentration of employment in energy-intensive sector, a greater dependence on energy import from Russia. So this is a reshuffling of traditional core periphery division in relation to the war in Ukraine. So indiscriminately, both core and peripheral countries are particularly affected by the war. So what about the future? Future development are absolutely uncertain due to a number of factors. I remember some of this, and for example, ecological transition. Just a provocative question. No, is ecological transition a real opportunity for change, or is a simple shift from the Russian franc path to the Chinese amber, to the Chinese fire? Because going green is a priority to overcome dependence on fossil fuels, on Russian gas. But the need to accelerate the ecological transition is revealing a very gloomy reality. For example, in terms of availability of raw materials, intermediate input, and technologies for the electric transition. In terms of this availability, Europe lags behind China, which dominates the electric vehicle value chain, and producing, for instance, a key component such as lithium-ion batteries. So, in some way, EU peripheral countries are vulnerable in a Europe that itself, as a whole, is vulnerable in a global context. Because Europe turns out to be fragile as compared to USA and China for its technological backwardness in key sectors, for example, in semiconductors, digital and green technology, and dependence on imports. If you want, even the so celebrated German export-led model, seems ill-suited, to cope with this changing geo-economic environment, in which the international trade itself is weaponized, and with countries that control raw materials, intermediate inputs, and key technologies, and these countries are ready to exert their power through this control. So the basic element of the German export-led model are not adapt anymore to cope with this new geoeconomical order situation. Because what are the basic element of German export-led model? Wage moderation, the compression of domestic and public demand. If you want, also the absence of diversification of production. So the question is, will the crisis of the German export-led model in this new geoeconomic and geopolitical context lead to a retreat of the core country, Germany itself, and so to a downward convergence Europe with negative impact on peripheral countries, or this is just an occasion to change radically, the strategy, in the direction of an expansion of domestic market in Europe. This is the question. And finally, another provocative question. Is less an advantage? Maybe yes, because if you look at the countries less integrated in CEMC, Central European Manufacturing Core, these countries are less sensitive to the impact of the war. These countries are, for example, some Southern European countries, Portugal or Spain, and these countries have undertaken development trajectories in the field of renewable energies. So, for example, wind and solar. So, the problem is that this virtuous development in some way are self-contained, within national boundaries, so without strong interconnection with other markets. But this is a note for the future, if you want, an area of cooperation, in order to develop, renewable energies. So I stop here.
Well, from what you both said, we can learn that the south of European community and the east have more in common that the populations living there are acknowledging. For instance, in the Eastern Europe during the Greek crisis, many people heard in the media that the Greeks are lazy and they fell into trouble because they could not deal with economics, and people actually believed in that. And now we need to realize that, in fact, instead of feeding stereotypes against each other, we need to seek ways for cooperation. Veronika, I wanted to ask you, what are the possible paths, mechanism of this the cooperation of two peripheries, and what are the obstacles apart from the stereotypes and lack of knowledge?
Yes, as I already said in the beginning, this kind of like enforcing or let's say producing some kind of dialogue and understanding each other was part of this project. Also, we as academicians, we try to create for it the academic conditions, but since the beginning there was this kind of, let's say, political strategy behind it. I must say that, of course, there's a lot of obstacles. Some of them already Giuseppe touched, by the way. They are structurally given, because yes, it's true that we are on peripheries, we are both vulnerable, we are both dependent, but we are dependent and vulnerable of something different. For example, Southern Europe, we can say they are dependent, for example, because they financialize so much on the capital from the core countries, from the banks from France and Germany, for example. We, on the other hand, on the eastern part, we are more dependent on foreign direct investments coming from countries like Germany or Netherlands, again, the core countries. But still, we are samely dependent, only the structure of this dependence is different. And this is, of course, a political challenge, because you cannot create the same political strategy, but still you should realize that you are basically in the same position, that it's not, for example, one of the biggest obstacles which you meet on the southern part. If I will speak about southern, there is a belief that because Southern Eastern Europe, specifically therefore, has productive platform, it is not actually any periphery and it is converging, but they don't realize that we don't own this productive platform. That all successful productive platform is integrated within most German control transnational corporations, and they are basically controlling this. So we became to be platform, to be like, slightly like colony, like colonized in this sense. They came in because they knew that we have industrial traditions, from the past, from the socialist state socialist period, and then use this. But this doesn't give us the position of the core, because we don't have the power to control. We don't have the technological edge. All this is coming from the core, from the mother corporations. If you look, I don't know, on the relation between Skoda and Volkswagen, we know there is a huge tension between Skoda and Volkswagen. Volkswagen is putting down always Skoda, doesn't want to have first technological edge, and so on and so on. This you can see in other cases. So this is a wrong belief, which is somehow spread in the southern Europe, because I understand they don't have the productive base. They don't have the productive, because Giuseppe explained, the European integration process helped them to stop the continuation of industrialization, and it did liberalization, and they were not able to compete. They were not able to finish their building of the productive platform. So they get in this financialization circle or problems. So we have to really be able to understand where are the differences and why these differences are there, what they mean. And if we don't understand, if we don't know the history, if we don't know the dynamics of these things, we never will understand each other. We will never be able to cooperate together. So this was one of the things we were trying to do in the study, to show the structure, to show why it happened, how it happened, and that really the dependence of let's say Central East Europe is based on the productive base. So there is it is in a way ironic situation in which something which gives you normally, like in Germany, the edge and power, is actually not giving you power. It is actually not helping with your development. It is making you dependent. So structural obstacles are big, and they have to be taken into account. They cannot be overcome easily. Then you have the next. Unfortunately, the European Union is very much based on the competition. And we often speak about solidarity, but sorry, there is a competition drive which is connected with the neoliberal globalization, which unfortunately European Union adopted at the time when the Central Eastern European and Balkan countries started to integrate as a key mechanism, as a key functioning mechanism. So competition is putting us against each other, because we are competing economically, we are competing with, to lure the transnational corporations between each other and also within each other. There is next mythos about the, for example, the 4 countries that we are all together because there is some Visegrad group and we are against migration. But since the very beginning, 1990s, basically, the competition paradigm was accepted by all these states. Poland was first together with Hungary. Then we added Slovakia and Czechia. And all these countries were competing against each other to the bottom. Yes, so the competition is the core paradigm of the European Union economic policies, and it is putting us apart. It is very, very powerful dividend impera mechanism, we have to remember. And then finally, there are ideological and culture, which you already said, but the ideological culture are the easiest to overcome if we will really be able to understand how they work. As I said before, the core is not only the filter for the redistribution of the economic power and political power. It is also a filter for the ideological mechanism to explain things to people, to legitimize. As you said, for example, about the crisis in the Greece, we were taught in all our region that the Greeks are lazy, which means that also Southern Europeans are lazy. Italians are also lazy, by the way. They love women and drink, and they don't work, as said one Dutch politician. So these ideological barriers should be the easiest put away. Unfortunately, what we see today in the European Union with the war in Ukraine is that they are growing the new barriers, which are not maybe within the European Union, but they are based on the same mechanisms, which is to build the wall, to isolate from so-called enemy, to continue the Cold War logic of division in Europe. Only this division moved a bit more eastern than we were before, which is a really sad story. So the ideological obstacles are here. They are in our heads, and I have to say that we are showing in the study that they are connected with the peripherality, because if you are on the periphery, you very often believe that the core is the authority. It's the aim. You know, Małgorzata, you probably in Poland also talk all the time about Západ, the West, and about Germany, that we want to be like them, we want to do this like them, but we cannot be ever like them if we will repeat the peripheral economic developments, if we will listen to transnational corporation, if we will try to copy the models which they are offering us, because these models are here to reproduce the power of the core, of the capital in the core. It's need to say capital in the core, because of course in the core you have some peripheries, you have also allies there, and the totally same goes for the Southern Europe. Totally same goes for the Southern Europe. That Southern Europe is in the same position. They only look up, they look to the north. They don't. We see to the west, and everything in the west is great. We have to converge. We have to repeat. We have to modernize. We have to become like German. We have to suppress our Easternness, because Easternness is this house which is bad. And we are ideologically believing in some kind of dream which really doesn't exist even in the core, actually. And the South is very same. They look France, they look Germany, and they want to become them also in order. So we have to break the chains of this kind of distribution of power and speak together directly and say, okay, we cannot do this, we cannot agree about this. For example, we know that migration is the huge problem for these two countries, these two regions. We, however, know that Ukrainian crisis is changing this very much, because from the countries which were refusing to accept refugees from the Africa and the Middle East, we became the biggest net receiver of war refugees in European Union. Poland and Czech Republic are on the top if you compare to the amount of the population. And there is a situation where our people are taking these refugees to live at home with us, to help them. Nothing like this, by the way, I think happened in the South. So these divergences are given by the different dynamics, by the geography also. You have different geography. You have also two important experiences, and that is the empire, because we are the former empire states nations, and the colonialism, which was more important for countries like Italy, for countries like Spain, like Portugal, and so on. So the understanding of the context, of the historical dynamics, of the reasoning behind is very important. It's much more important than to listen to simple ideological narratives about us and them, and which are usually based on the, as I said, on the power of the foreign capital from the core, usually. So this is in the nutshell why there are obstacles, and I believe still that we share a lot of same problems. We share the problem that we cannot develop sustainably. We cannot develop, let's say, with enough dignity, which our countries would need. And in this sense, we can help each other. I also believe that economically we could help each other, because we could boost own economies by some kind of direct relations between own firms, and there could be scams done for it, and so on and so on. And of course, this is the question of long-term political dialogue, something which will take long time, and we must have patience, and we just started to work on it. So let's see what brings us the future.
Veronika, that was quite an optimistic voice, surprisingly. So before we end this exciting interview, I have one question to both of you, and I would ask you for a concise answer. Do you think there are grounds that in these crisis times, the peripheral countries come up with an alternative for Europe? So this Europe of competition is replaced by Europe of solidarity, or at least that the steps you talked about start to be introduced in practice, that we don't copy either the model of economy that does not serve our economies, but instead we come up with something that actually lets us make steps forward. Giuseppe, what are your take?
I said before, export-led model, German export-led model is in crisis, because hyper is not time anymore of hyper globalization. No? So maybe a retreat from the export-led model could be an expansion of European internal market, also in the direction of satisfaction of social needs, not only in terms of increased competitiveness, the myth of international competitiveness, but an industrial policy not to enhance and to boost international competitiveness, but also to reinforce the element of the expansion of internal markets in Europe. Also, as said before, in the direction of meeting social needs. There are a lot to do, in this sense. So to rethink industrial policy also in this direction, not to boost the export-led model, but to expand internal market. Maybe in this time of crisis, this radical change of strategy could be happening.
Veronika, your final words.
Yes, well, historically, we know that the peripheries are usually more willing to do experiments with alternatives. Unfortunately, one of these experiments as an answer for the, let's say, economic backwardness breaks or economic problems was in the beginning of the 20th century or first half of the 20th century, fascism. Fascism was actually, it's called very often modernization dictatorship. As we know, in our part of Europe, in Central East Europe, we had another experiment with alternative in the second half of the 20th century. That was the state socialism of more or less Soviet, with more or less Soviet nuances, more Soviet in Czechoslovakia, less Soviet in Poland, for example, let's put it like this, or Yugoslavia. So, of course, the peripheries are prone to this because they are on the edges and they feel usually the vulnerabilities of any crisis. Giuseppe said it. Now Germany is in the crisis or coming into the crisis, and most probably all the Central European this production platform will be in crisis, and this will be a huge challenge for all of our countries. At the same time, we could see that global financial crisis was very harsh for the Southern Europe, and pandemic was also very harsh for the many Southern European countries because they are based on the tourism, as you know, and services, and both these sectors were very, very predominantly under the attack. So you see the situation then in the last 10 years, you have three big crises, which all of them are very deeply influencing the situation in the Southern Europe and Eastern Europe. Of course, in the core countries also, we no doubt about it, they are in problems, but they are in different level of problems. They are having in all indicators stronger numbers than we have. So we are falling quicker and deeper in the troubles because of these vulnerabilities we have. So of course the alternative, theoretically, history is telling that yes. The problem is the articulation of these alternatives. Giuseppe already said that there are some ways how we could think direct in the economic sphere. One of it is the domestic market and the domestic market and internal market expansion. Of course, we can think also about the political way how to get rid of neoliberal thinking, because this is something which is, I think, a huge problem, because we know that neoliberalism doesn't work, but especially in the Central Eastern Europe, nobody wants to admit it really openly. I hope we will have one of the next interview about this, about the resilience of the neoliberalism in our region. So there is a lot of questions around the formulation or articulation of the alternatives. We know that the rightist populists are not the answer. Even they are on the grow. In Italy, they are on the grow. In Poland, they are by power. In the Czech Republic, everywhere they are. They don't bring any real alternatives. We see that there are no alternatives. So it is definitely on the side of the left to try to develop something. And here, I want to be optimist, even I know that in our region, the left is in very weak shape, and in the Southern Europe, they are still relatively strong, but this question in 5 years, if there will be not a backlash from the right, see Italy, they already are in the situation, and we know that there are particular political parties of same type like we have in Spain and in that Vox and in Portugal, Chega. So we don't know the future. So it is important to at least try to articulate these alternatives. And I have to say that for our region, for Central Eastern Europe, it is even time to realize that we should even try, because there is also no, I don't feel that everybody believes that capitalism is great and globalization is basically great. And if you start to say, and there is even the main discourse is that there is no any political economy, that there is no problem with power, like everybody is, freedom and everything works itself. So it is very challenging thing, but I think the times will push us to start to search.
Thank you for this voice. And before you, the viewers as well, start searching your alternatives, I welcome you to read the whole study, The 100 Shades of the EU. It is available on the Transform Network site. You find the link in the description of this video. And I would like to thank you, my two fantastic guests. Thank you, Giuseppe. Thank you, Veronika, for being us today. You will never understand the European Union if you don't understand how core periphery dynamics shapes the community. And this is the essential thing you will learn in the 100 Shades of the EU study. Thank you again. Don't forget to subscribe, and see you again.